Welcome to the Lessons from the Great Coaches podcast.
I've learned that you don't do it alone.
You learn so many different things from so many different coaches.
That's an elite learning environment.
Failure is not a problem. How you deal with it is a problem.
How to be resilient.
How important it is to infuse joy in the process of learning.
To be a good coach, you've got to give more than you take.
What an interesting life it is to be a leader.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership. And so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. Today's episode is on the topic of chasing influence. And I'm joined for the discussion by my friend Murray Noble, who is the president of the Melbourne Baseball Club, and Dr Troy Urdhal, who has just written a terrific book called Chasing Influence. The book is half story and half reflection on his learning as an educator and a coach. Troy has a deep-rooted passion for inspiring positive change in the lives of others, and you will hear that energy and passion come through in our discussion today. And just before we go to the interview, today's podcast is brought to you by the Macquarie University Business School's MBA program. Designed to empower, challenge and transform, the Macquarie MBA gives you the business skills and knowledge you need to succeed in an evolving global economy. The program bridges the gap between theory and real-world application, bringing together world-leading professors, executives and industry partners to teach you how business can be used for good. I have just started working with the team at Macquarie on some projects and can attest to the quality of the people and material. To find out more, search for Macquarie University Business School's MBA. And now please enjoy a discussion on chasing influence with Dr. Troy Urdhal.
You're listening to the Lessons from the Great Coaches podcast.
Troy Urdhal, good morning and welcome to the Great Coaches podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to connecting and talking about great coaching.
Well, and I'm here today also with my good friend down in Melbourne, Australia, president of the Melbourne Baseball Club, Murray Noble. How are you, Murray?
Yeah, great, Paul. Good to be here. Good to meet you too, Troy.
Troy, could we start with something really simple? Could you tell us where you are in the world and what you've been up to so far today?
I am coming to you from near Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I am a career-long educator. I have been a head baseball coach for 23 years, started off as a classroom teacher, and now I am a school administrator. And my day job is an activities director. And so I help coordinate all of the athletics and activities programs for the public high school in grades 9 through 12 of about 700 students. So a mid-sized high school right outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Well, we're very happy to have you on today to talk about your book. Murray and I have both read it. We loved it. We're going to get into it. It's a part story. It's part fable. There's a lot of 23 years worth of wisdom in it. But the book's called Chasing Influence. And I want to start by asking you what the title means to you.
You know, the book's for anyone who's interested in being better or improving their influence on others. So anyone that wants to positively influence other people and leave a legacy of servant leadership and care is really who the target is for this book. I believe that life is all about relationships and the relationships we hold, and that coaching is one of the greatest opportunities a person can have in life. I can't think of many jobs better than the opportunity to be a coach. And unfortunately, too many coaches, I believe, are chasing after the wrong outcomes. And in some cases, at whatever cost it might be. And I just don't think that's what we want our legacy to be as coaches. And so as a coach, important questions about who are you and what do you want to do? Do you want to be chasing after wins, or do you want to have the opportunity to make other people's lives better? And I think that's an easy answer for me. Because of our influence, we have the opportunity. So it's all about chasing the influence, not chasing the wins.
And what was the impetus to write the book?
I never thought I'd write a book, to be honest with you. I really didn't ever think I'd write a book. But as an activities director, we do a lot of work with our student athletes about developing and building better people, not just better athletes. And that comes in the form of various lessons. And so all the while, I didn't realize it, but really I had kind of been writing a book without knowing it. And so didn't think I'd write one, but really kind of was. And it was probably meant to be when I was quarantined with COVID, and it made perfect sense to capture that opportunity and capture that moment to write a book. So in truth, I fleshed out and outlined this book in Mexico when I was on quarantine in early 2022, stuck in a hotel room by myself, and grabbed the opportunity to say, all right, this is what a book could look like. And then spent the next year writing that book. And it all ties into my leadership purpose and who I am as a leader and as a coach. And I serve to use the power of school activities to make the world a better place. I think through sport, we can make the world a better place. And I get the opportunity to work with some awesome people to do that. And that's why I show up each and every day, is because I truly believe that leaders can make the world a better place. We see examples on the other side, too, of making it a worse place. But I don't think there's any more influential leaders than coaches. Their influence is going to last a lifetime. And there aren't that many jobs where we can say that influence is going to last for a lifetime.
Wow, that was the impetus to start the podcast, actually, that the best leaders I know are sports coaches. I think there's just something about their selflessness and stoicism that's in short supply these days. But let's talk about the book. The main character in the book is Coach Stick Olsen. And we're going to talk a lot about Stick today. He's a fantastic character you've created there. But he uses the acronym HEART to explain his values. Now, could you tell us about them, but importantly, how they go on to shape Stick as a leader?
Stick became a combination or an amalgamation of all the great coaches that I've had the pleasure to work with or be coached by in my life. And many of the lessons I've learned as a coach along the way are incorporated and infused into this flawed but transformational figure who is showing up each and every day to capture the heart of students, of his athletes. And in this case, athletes means high school athletes and adults because of the ages and groups he's able to coach. And he shows up every day to capture the hearts of those players. And that means he's all in on relationships. When we say capture the heart, there's two pieces to it. And we know as coaches that our athletes don't really care what we know until they know that we care. And the relationship piece is so significant, so important for great coaches. And so you want to teach life skills. They might be his ball players for a handful of years, but they're going to be part of his greater team and his legacy for the rest of their lives. And so for them and for him and his coaching, that meant teaching the skills of heart. And so heart means hard work, empathy, attitude, teamwork, respect and teamwork. Let me get my spelling right. Hard work, empathy, attitude, respect, and teamwork. That spells out heart. So there's really a dual meaning to this. And that's, as coaches, and for Stick, he showed up every day to teach life skills. And that's why he coached. He wanted to win, for sure. And he's competitive. In the book, the character comes through as competitive. But at the same time, relationships might not be anything more important than the relationship that a coach creates with his or her athletes. And I think that's something that we're getting a lot better at. That's changed over time as athletes have evolved and as coaches have evolved. That we now know how significant and important that relationship piece was. I'm not sure that decades past, we'd always say the relationship was there. But to be a transformational coach, we know how significant and how important that really is. We can learn performance skills like hard work, attitude, teamwork in sports. We can also learn moral character skills, and that's where the empathy and the respect piece comes in. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way that can get lost too, because we know sports can teach really bad lessons if the wrong people are leading them. And that research will even show the more advanced level you get to in sports, the more morally corrupt sport can become. And so it's people like Stick, Coach Stick, the transformational caring coaches who are the linchpin to connect that learning that will carry through for the rest of a life. So Heart's all about teaching life lessons and making that relationship and that connection with athletes. I think that's something that every transformational coach prioritizes.
Troy, you opened the book with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and I'll read that. Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does, which I agree. How have you seen that unfold in the field when you've been coaching teams, Troy?
Hey, thanks for grabbing that quote. It's one of my favorites. I think it's a wonderful quote.
There's lots of great quotes in the book.
It's part of being a history teacher, I think. Context matters for me. And there's so many fantastic lessons throughout time if we take the opportunity to capture them. And sports, they're really like the original reality TV show, whether it's the World Cup, the Olympics, even the Super Bowl, you name it. There's little that can really unite people like sports can. People, for some reason, seem to connect around the weather, right? We ask, how's the weather? And the other thing that we connect around is sports. That's what we talk about. For whatever reason, we talk about weather, we talk about the sports. And one of the best experiences of sport, and one of the number one reasons for being on a team, is because of the connections to others and the bonds that we form with teammates. And that's what's so significant and how it really unites us. You know, I think back to my own experiences, and even as a father, when my kids lost their grandfather at too young of an age, who showed up for them? Right? It was their teammates that showed up for them, even as youth players. On a larger, more national, even I guess this is an American example, but it's a global stage. I think back to those unifying moments through sport. After 9/11. President Bush came out to the mound at Yankee Stadium. And so I guess this is a good baseball example. He walked out there wearing a bulletproof vest, and there was a lot of people that did not want him to go out there and do that. And he threw out the first pitch of, I think it was Game 3 in 2001, and he absolutely stuck it. He threw it right down the middle, and it brought a country together. If for only a moment, regardless of politics, it really brought a country together. And that's a really big example. But this is happening at a smaller level on every team across the world every day.
For tonight's ceremonial first pitch, and please welcome the President of the United States. Mr. President.
That is a great example, and I have seen some great videos from that from George Bush and Derek Jeter. Don't bounce it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the last words he hears before going out there was Jeter telling him not to throw in the dirt. I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah. And he was I think he was probably more nervous about that. And he warmed up. No one warms up, as we know. 50 Cent and a few others should, but no. I understand the book is obviously non-fictional, and the situations, the characters, lots of metaphors and so forth. But one thing I noted about the book relevant to today is that the internet doesn't exist in Mossel Falls. And I've got a 17-year-old, and actually one of the guys sent a photo from the weekend where we're just waiting for the temperature to be right, and there's 7 kids on the bench with their phones out. Kids are blasted with advice from social media. There's some ridiculous schools and techniques and some weird exercises that the kids are now being suggested they do. But how would you suggest that amateur coaches, which is the majority of coaches obviously, work with these methods to ensure that we're getting a consistent message to these kids?
they have lots of angles to go with that one, right? We're to the point where I would say we're at information overload. Like you're mentioning, there's just almost too much available to us between social media and YouTube. You can find just about anything on the internet. And as we're talking about sports and kids, I think for all of us as coaches, it's important to remind ourselves why we're showing up and what is our why. What's that coaching purpose? Is it about us? Is it for us, or is it about those that we serve? And for those who are servant leaders, transformational leaders, they obviously know we're showing up to serve other people. I think there's some constants in expert coaching, and how we get past that, that overload of information and even over coaching. Establishing culture. Coaches are the driving force in doing that in culture, and so every last athlete and even their parents should know what's expected of them and from their coach. As coaches, are we looking past poor behavior or selfish actions, or are we calling them out and saying that's not okay here? So as we establish that culture, how are we showing up? What kind of an example as a coach are we setting, and are we portraying to our athletes? And this is whether it's youth sports or even adult level. But we do know that kids want certain things. Youth kids, they want coaches who are motivating, encouraging. They want coaches who are approachable, and they want coaches who know what they're talking about, that are competent. And that's remained constant throughout my career as a coach and as an activities director. When we talk to youth athletes, they want coaches who are motivating, encouraging, help them get to that next place, who is approachable, that relationship piece, and someone who knows what they're talking about, someone who's competent, who knows the X's and O's in sport. So with that, I think we overcomplicate it, and we just need to keep it simple sometimes. Let's not overcomplicate our sports. Baseball is a wonderful example of that. When you talk about all the data analytics and the sabermetrics that go into baseball,
yes.
Sometimes it's just see ball, hit ball. Let our athletes be athletes. And then maybe most importantly of everything, let's remember why people are showing up to play sports, and that's to have fun. And so I think simplicity is the key, is just to keep it simple and not to overcomplicate it.
I wrote some notes when I was preparing for today and reading the book, and I had probably 40 one-line quotes from the book, and I struggled to work out which one was my favorite. There were so many, but I do love you can grind it dull or you can grind it sharp. Go slower, arrive sooner. The redwood examples, the wooden bamboo, fantastic. One of the things I've noticed, I know as a coach, and that's something I've always focused on, is making sure that parents understand a plan. So as a coach, do you encourage time spent with the parents, pre-season especially, or pre-trainings? Because some of them just want immediate results for their child.
Yeah, and I think a pre-season meeting at minimum should be required for especially any level of youth sport. And then it's setting expectations and also getting everyone on that same sheet of music. And it all comes back to communication. In my work, I've seen many wonderful coaches, and I've seen a number of coaches who struggle too. And the ones who struggle, a lot of times it's actually related to communication and communicating with parents. Parents get a bad rap sometimes. I think, I don't know what the number is, 95, 98%. Most parents really mean well. And they also view things through the eyes of love. And as coaches, we need to understand that we're working with the most valuable possession in their world, that parent's world, their child. And sometimes, having that perspective, I think it's probably why I changed as a coach when I became a parent as well. And a lot of times when I've seen disagreements with parents, it's usually around misunderstandings. And a lot of times that misunderstanding is about the purpose of our programs and why our coaches are there every day. They're there to help those athletes have fun, to get better at something they love to do, and to become a better person, not just a better athlete. That's why our coaches are showing up. So if they're looking for, draft status or a Division I scholarship or some type of record or NIL money or some other crazy thing, they're not gonna get that from our programs and from our coaches. They're not gonna get that from me. What they're gonna get from me is an effort and attempt to capture that heart each and every day, and to use those core values to make that student, that athlete, a better person, and push them to be their absolute best each and every day. And so coaches have to share that vision, that why, and they need to do it early on with athletes, with parents. That way parents can understand how they'll define what success means, really what the coach defines as success.
I found with coaching teams and rep teams and the likes at state and national championships that I try to make sure the parents hear what I'm saying to the kids after the game. I kind of head towards the fence and I talk loud enough intentionally. The kids don't know that, but I'm not normally talking to them. I'm talking over to their parents. But I read an article years ago that the one thing that kids hated most about youth sport was the drive home. And that's, of course, related to parents not understanding the little things, the 1% efforts in baseball, a sacrifice bunt or a backing up, or the biggest cheerleader, or the one guy that steps out of the dugout and high fives everyone more than anyone else. The Steve Nash, the guy who gave the most high five, the bump outs. That's something that I think is really, really important. So it's the same in sports. It should be the same in businesses. How do we encourage parents or supporters or managers to understand this?
Yeah, that's so much easier said than done, right? It's easy to admire the problem, and it's much more difficult to solve it. And I think it is a vicious cycle. You know, we hear about like a 24-hour rule for parents talking to coaches. There should probably be a 24-hour rule for parents talking to their kids as well. And when I say that, I mean more on the negativity and the criticism that can sometimes come in that car ride home. You talked about the car ride home. I think the only words the parents should say after the game are, "I love watching you play." And just keep it as simple as that. I love watching you play. And if they have any positive reinforcement, by all means. But like the post-game critique, that can wait. That the coach can do that. And as a matter of fact, the kid knows already, right? The kid already knows this. They don't need mom and dad to be hammering at home, especially in that moment when probably all they need is to be loved at that moment. And so, you know, and I think that's the best coaches are the ones that understand this and that can help coach and teach the parents in that moment. But it can be really hard because there's so much emotion that goes into sport, and that's why you see crazy fan behavior and everything else that goes with it. Because sports are emotional. It's part of what we love about it, but not in the car ride home.
Yeah, one of the guys that I play with, he's played a very senior level. His son's in the under 18 Australian squad as a baseballer, and they've got a great family rule, which I really admire. If the son sits in the car with his hat on, we can talk about the game. If he puts his hat in the back or in the boot, I don't want to talk about the game. And it's a very, very beautiful, subtle, respected way to operate.
I think I might borrow that. That's a fantastic rule. I like that. And share that with our parents.
Troy, in the book, there's a quote where you say, one of the most significant influences on team members' experiences is the depth and quality of relationships. I can see you nodding as I say it. Now, learning to be a good teammate, it's also a life skill, given the amount of work that these days it's done in teams, community groups, corporate life, work life, wherever you happen to be. How has the effort required to build the relationships and skills changed over the years you've been involved with sport?
Yeah, and this is another tricky one for us to navigate in 2024 and beyond. And in part, where that quote comes from is my own research. When I did my dissertation, I traveled across our region, and I asked athletes about their best and worst experiences. And best experiences certainly come back to relationships with peers, relationships with coaches. But I think we're at a bit of crossroads now of me versus we in sports. Athletes, I think, too frequently, it's as though they're becoming weaponized or a mercenary of sport, or like an independent contractor where they go from team to team. And we've seen this in pro sports. Right now in the States, it's NFL free agent signings, and so this is happening a lot over here right now. And now it's become norm in college sports that didn't used to be the case. And we're even seeing this more and more in youth sports where I don't like the situation, I'm going to go find a different team. And we start to lose that community, in the community sense that really is that bonding piece, that glue that holds people together. And you build teams through shared goals and purpose and time together, that significant time together. And so it's those experiences away from practices and away from games that are in many ways every bit as meaningful, if not more meaningful than some of the competitions for our athletes. And if you ask athletes, they'll tell you that. You ask them about their best experiences, they're going to talk about the bus rides or the car rides with their friends. They're going to talk about the weekend tournaments or the time at the hotel or the pool or team meals, whatever it might be, some team outing, all those opportunities to create bonds and to create relationships, just being together as a team. And so that's why I think for coaches, it's significant and important that we don't just focus on, and it could be any team setting, right? It could be athletics or it could be out in the business world. If you have a team of people, that you need to focus on relationships and you need to build bonds. If we do that, we know that those groups will perform better. So often we spend all of our time focusing on the technical details, the X's and O's, the practice plans, and we glaze over or skip some of that meaningful time together that's valued most.
Another idea I like in the book is the Goldilocks principle of communication. Can you tell us about that?
The story of Goldilocks, right? And so that's about having the just right amount of something. So not too cold, not too hot, or not having too much of something, or not having too little of it. And so as applied to communication, there's a lot of different ways in chasing influence that it connects to this idea. And we talked about communication earlier and how significant and important it is, right? All parts of life, whether it's coaching, whether it's leadership, whether it's being a good coworker, or being a good spouse, a good father, that we owe the world and we owe those that we have relationships with honesty. And I think we owe our athletes honesty too. But at the same time, it's not about crushing dreams. And this is something I think every coach can relate to. Anyone who's had that conversation with a team member about what is their role and value on the team, what team are they on, playing time, that dirty word playing time. We owe it to our athletes to be honest. At the same time, we shouldn't be crushing dreams. And so that's really the Goldilocks principle, is finding that balance between the two. And I think that's a key to great coaching, is being a strong communicator where athletes do know their role and value, whereas coaches, we're holding our teams to high expectations, at the same time giving them care and support every step of the way. And so there's a lot, this is a passion for me on communication and the Goldilocks zone, finding it right. One thing that always trips me up in coaching is yelling. Are you a yeller and do you coach angry? These ideas, I don't know what other area of life we can get away with that. And somehow we continue to allow it in coaching, right? If your boss yelled at you every day at work, how long would you keep doing it? If your teacher screamed at you every day in the classroom, how long would that teacher be teaching? If your spouse screamed and yelled at you every day, how long would you stay married? And I know that is a whole different can of worms, but we just don't really stand for it in other areas of life. But somehow in coaching, we allow it. And so avoiding the angry coaching loop somehow, and that's, like I said, a passion for me, is just understanding why you're showing up and you're not coaching angry, and that old school notion of I'm going to send a message. That's poor communication. Unless the athlete knows what your message is, all you're doing is giving your athlete reasons to be upset at you, because they're going to make up their own story about whatever the message is as the coach is sending it. So I think that's one of those soft skills that coaches and leaders can spend more time on, that anyone can improve and anyone can change in terms of communication, but we just don't spend enough time thinking and reflecting on how do we present, how do we communicate, where are the messages that we send, both verbally and non-verbally.
Yeah. I think relevant to that, Troy, is former Australian Army Chief David Morrison once said, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. which I think has got a lot of similarities to what you just said in your quote. What you permit, you promote. Yelling is an example of that. Behavior of a coach is very much an example of that. We're human, we get frustrated, we make mistakes. As a coach, what tools do you have and what do you encourage coaches and managers across all fields of endeavor to avoid acting and reacting so emotionally?
Yeah. And I think, and even as I talk now, I always want to, throw it out there that transformational coaches aren't perfect coaches, right?
Yeah.
Servant leaders aren't perfect leaders. And so we all need to acknowledge that we're human and we're going to make mistakes as leaders and we're going to make mistakes as coaches. I know that I make mistakes. Like, it's just part of being human is to be flawed. And when that happens, we have to take responsibility. And the hits will come, right? And so directly and specifically to your question of like, what is a strategy or what's a way to manage it when these problems and issues come our way? I think the best way to say it is to insert your purpose, because in sports, your best player is going to get injured. The team ball bag might get lost, right? It didn't make it through in luggage, whatever it might be. It won't stop raining. The weather's horrific, whatever it is. The refs are going to make bad calls. It's part of sport. It's going to happen. Angry parent yelling at you, you name it, the hits are going to come. And I think what happens usually is when the hits come, we respond, right? Someone hit me, I'm going to respond right back to it. But if we can pause and throw our purpose in there and just get back to that, it's really, I think, a calming mechanism to ground yourself in, why am I doing this work? What really is the issue, to gain some perspective and get you back to your true motivations. And so that's a strategy I use, is that when something's going poorly, and I love the Jacko YouTube video. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. Good. Something bad happens. Good. Gives me an opportunity to get better, to learn from it, and to improve. And part of that good for me is throwing that purpose in there. Whatever it is, there's something to be learned by it. But that will only happen if we pause to take advantage of the opportunity.
How a leader or a coach responds to failure can influence people for a lifetime. Can you tell us about your experience with this, please, Troy?
I like to use the term, and I borrow this. Dr. Sindra Kamphoff talks about learn, burn, return. And I know this is really true for me because that can be a tough question for a lot of leaders, a lot of people. And I throw myself in that camp. The old interview question, tell us about a time you failed and what you learned from, or something like that. I really do learn and burn. And maybe my burn is a little too strong, but I don't dwell on failures yet. I know how significant and important it is to learn from those failures, and how significant and important it is to get honest feedback and reflection that can help us and inform us to make future better decisions and to make improvement. But reflection can be hard in such a fast-paced, busy world we're in. I don't know that becomes much of a practice for many of us to reflect. But I think that mistake making can really humanize us. It shows our vulnerabilities. It shows that we are human, and that all of us need to have failure or mistake making is part of our narrative, part of our story, right? Because all of us make mistakes. All of us have done that before. The story that is most memorable to me in terms of failure and mistake making, the one that still will run or make me sweat and tingle and just all those emotions come back. I might even blush right now as I talk about it. Is I once was leading a cross country race as an activities director in a golf cart with a couple hundred runners behind me, and I was in charge of running this meet. And the mountain biker that was supposed to be the rabbit and lead the race didn't show up, and so they asked me as the administrator in charge if I'd run that cross country race, and I said sure. Like, I'm familiar enough with that course. Halfway through, I took a wrong turn. I took a wrong turn in a cross country race with a couple hundred runners behind me following me. I mean, the distance matters. This is something that really, really matters. And I messed it up. And it was probably the most horrifying few minutes of my life. But I like to use that as a story about failure and mistake making, because in the end, calmer heads prevailed. The person next to me who was sharing this moment with me was able to call a coach and figure out how to get the distance back to near perfection. So even though they were running in the wrong order, running in the wrong places, we got it back to a 5K, which it was supposed to be, or really, really close to the 5K. And then the amount of grace that these teenage athletes gave me afterward, because I was pretty dejected. I mean, this was a traumatic moment for me, super public, leading hundreds of people down the wrong path, and the amount of grace, including to the next day, a student athlete giving me a little note and a soda saying, "You did great yesterday." So mistakes don't need to define you, right? We can learn from them. We're all going to fail. It's really about what we learn from it and how we respond. That's most significant and most important. We can't be afraid of mistakes. I think that's crippling for all of us as leaders, as performers, is to be afraid of making a mistake. Those who try are going to fail more than those who don't. And I think there's an important life lesson in that.
There's a lot of stoicism in good coaches, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I do love the Ted Lasso approach of just be a goldfish. I think that works really well too. But there's a question I'd like to ask you, Troy. I'm not a coach. I haven't really been involved. Well, I coached the under-13s years and years and years ago. But my background's corporate. So I was a CEO and I used to run businesses in Europe. And one of the ideas in the book that I ascribe to is this idea of being careful of using absolutes and leaving room for maybe. I don't think the world is black and white. I think it's grey, and I think you have to navigate that grey every day. But tell us why you think this is so important when leading people.
Well, I think I got it from my mom. And so, the choice of words has always been significant. I know that, and there's some language differences between English in the States and Australia, but my mom would always remind me there's no backwards. There's no S at the end of backward. Backward's a single direction. You're going backward. You don't say you're going forwards. You're going forward. You're going backward. Same would be, if someone says most unique. She said, unique, that's one of a kind. There isn't such a thing as most unique. It's either unique or it's not unique. And so there's a special place for me about absolutes and leaving room for maybe. And words like must, accept, every, not always, never, right? To be careful when you're using those words, because the brain immediately goes to finding exceptions. Anytime we do that, we try to break that. We try to find an exception to why that's not true when someone uses that absolute. And I think it's also a reminder that we have to seek to understand before we cast judgment, that leave ourselves some wiggle room in there, because we may need it. And we don't know what may have happened or what the situation was or the circumstances behind it. And that leaves us a little grace. It gives us that wiggle room that we might need. I like to tell coaches, and for me too, I try to practice this, remove the word but from our vocab and really replace it with the word now. So what would be an example? That was a great shot, but next time let's hit the back of the net, right? So if you said that was a great shot, but next time let's hit the back of it. The athlete didn't hear anything prior to but. All they heard is, oh, I didn't score. I'm not very good. It wasn't a very good effort, or it wasn't performed well. If you just flip that around and say, that was a great shot. Now next time let's hit the back of the net, right? They're going to receive both sides of that sentence. And so language is significant. It is important to me, and I try to be mindful in that. And that's a good example of throwing maybe in there. Gives us that grace and that wiggle room we sometimes need.
Troy, maybe just one final question, if I could. Towards the end of the book, you talk about the concept of true success. I'm using an absolute there, I know, but you do talk about it as true success. Tell us how you describe it in the book and what it means to you.
And I think we can do it with this. I think it works, and I'll explain why. I believe every coach needs to know their purpose and their why. They need to show up. They need to know why they show up and why they coach the way they do. I think it's significant for them to understand how it feels to be coached by them, and they also need to know what success means, or what true success, what they're after, and how they're going to get there. for me, it's about living my purpose. So true success for me, did I help someone today? That's service. Was I able to help someone? Did I help another person grow today? As an educator and as a coach, that's leadership. And that's back to my purpose. I said at the beginning is I serve to use the power of sports to make the world a better place. How did I make another person better? How did I grow another person? And then it's for me too. Did I get better today? And so at the end of the day, those are questions I ask myself. So to your question, I think success, there's two parts to it. It's making a positive difference in another person's life, and it's the pursuit of mastery for each of us, striving to become the best version of ourselves. Some days that's easier than others. That's not always easy to do that. It's not always easy to capture those opportunities. It's why my office, I have a quote hanging up that I love to use. It's a Thomas Edison quote. I use it in the book. Most people miss opportunity because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work, right? I think that really sums it up, that finding success, it's not something that's just going to fall in our lap. But two ways of looking at it for me: making that positive difference in another person's life, and then pursuing mastery, being the best version of myself possible. Troy,
what a great way to finish. Thank you so much for your time today. I loved reading about Coach Dick Olsen and the town of Waffle Falls and all of the people in the new stadium. And I highly recommend the book. I'll put the link in the show notes, and I wish you all the best with it.
Thanks for having me on. I love talking about it.
You're listening to the Lessons from the Great Coaches podcast.
Murray, what a great interview. What did you think? What resonated with you?
I think that it's so relevant to how sport is done in Australia. We don't have professional high school coaches. We don't have that 4 or 5 games a week. So I look at it from a practical point of view, an operational point of view, whereas you're looking from a strategy point of view and obviously a CEO point of view. But there's so many little things and tones and one word that can make a difference to how we work with these kids. And as leaders, as coaches, as managers, it's hard because you have 10, 12 NFL, 40 people in your squad. You've got to be different. But as in the book, you've got to have the relationship and understand the person first. Stephen Covey, seek first to understand before you try to be understood. I think that's very relevant.
I loved the piece at the end there about language. That really connected with me, just the words you use. And it connected with me because, I've spent a lot of my career in countries that don't have English as a first language. And you have to be doubly careful on the words you use. Adverbs, anything that ends in ly doesn't usually translate. But just hearing him take it to another level, I thought was fantastic. But this whole idea of tradition with baseball, it's such a traditional sport, isn't it? There's such routines and legacy. And I think he captures that in the way you don't agree? I think he captures that in the way he talks about the game.
Oh, there is a lot of there's a lot of capacity to view the game. There's a lot of coverage, if you want it, of the game. And you just need to listen to ESPN and some of the coverage, and everyone's got a story or a scenario or a situation. It's probably similar to listening to career commentators, and Richie Beno and Bill Laurie and all these older guys had stories about every single thing. And there's savants out there who'll quote you from a 1948 test series. Well, it's the same in baseball. It's the same in baseball, but every single play in baseball can be different. And there's a lot of superstitions, which I don't really believe in, but there are still people who have never touched a white line on a baseball diamond. There are people who still wear, there's a guy on my team who's got the same, has batting gloves that's got holes all over it. We've got a grand final coming up on Sunday. He's not going to replace that glove until after the grand final. And if he wins the grand final, he'll cut a piece of that glove and he'll stick it on the back of his new glove. There's some funny things that people do, but I guess it's probably the same in every sport. People wear the same socks. Steve Waugh had his red terry toweling thing that used to hang out the back of his pocket.
He did too.
So be it. If it works for you, you do it.
Troy talked a lot about purpose. He mentioned it so many times in the interview. This is something that's been, I know you've been focusing on it the last 12 months as well. It's been something you've been thinking about in your life. What resonated with you from his comments on purpose?
I think it's a reflection that everyone should do. I think it's something that, and I'm thinking about the 40 years that I've played baseball and have been involved with baseball, that the 80, 100, 200 coaches across teams, and our club has 19 teams. There's 19 coaches. Some have assistant coaches. There's 25 people that have different approaches and different purposes, but we need to get together at the start of the year and have a purpose, having a mission statement, as you would have in an organization. And you're never going to, as people have different motivators. People have different purposes. We need to respect that. It's hard in a volunteer-driven sport where maybe a couple of people might get paid because of their time commitment and coaching, but we've got to adapt as leaders. We've got to adapt to everyone has different priorities, and you can't sack someone easily. We've had to do it to encourage someone not to get involved in certain things, or we've had to make some hard calls for the greater good of the team, for the purpose of the team, for the purpose of the kids, and that's been accepted. But the thing about purpose is, sorry, I shouldn't say but, however, the purpose of the club, the purpose of the individuals, the purpose of the families, the purpose of the development of the kids in their lives is more important than a win or a loss.
I was thinking a lot about the comment he made about the best moments you have, or the moments you remember, are the moments away from competition. Yeah. And I was thinking about it because, of course, I resigned after more than a decade with Asahi, and we moved home to Australia. And as I connect with my old colleagues, it's exactly what I remember. It's not the time in the boardroom where we created some great strategy. It was a moment we were out in the field. It was of course, it was in beer. So it was a moment we were in the pub. It was a moment we were doing something with people. And it was such a great idea.
And you see that in sports all the time. And I'll use Jack, my son. He doesn't play baseball because he wants to go to college. He doesn't play baseball because he wants to be a superstar. There was a time when he realized, I need to put in this much effort. And that's not him. He plays for his mates. He plays to be with his mates. He plays for the road trips. He plays for the competitions, interstate competitions. And he accepts that. It took me probably a year longer than him to accept that as a dad and as a player. But I'm very comfortable with it now. But everyone, again, that comes back to everyone's got a different purpose. Why are you here? And that's an organisation. As our club, we've got 200 people. We've got 19 teams. And myself, personally, I recruit and I work for myself. I work from home most days. I need the club for my camaraderie, they're my tribe. There's 200 people. I've got teams I play with. I've got a great leadership team. It's something that I have as a purpose that I need. But that's completely different to what an elite athlete does. We send kids to college every year. We've got guys who play semi-pro. We've got people who come out and all they want to do is be their best athlete. They don't care about the social part, or they care less about it. But we've got to find an equilibrium for 200 people. We don't get it right. You can't get everyone happy. Some people measure happiness differently. We talked about this at our AGM last year about some people think the best measure of success is an A-grade premiership. Well, hang on, what about our women's team? What about junior numbers? What about financial? Everyone's got different. What about our community? Our contribution to the community? Everyone's got a different measure of success. And we've got to adapt to that. We can't get it all right. There'll be squeaky wheels, but we're not an organisation that can sack people.
Murray, fantastic to chat with you today with Troy. I loved it. Let's see if we can find another baseball, dare I say it, nerd out there in the world, and we'll do it again.
I wouldn't call myself, I know some baseball nerds. I'm not a baseball nerd, but geez, enjoyed it, mate. It's good to have a chat.
Thanks, Murray.